Hey, it's Adamic. If you want to jump ahead to interviews for specific films, look for the links in the description of this video. And for other Cinequest film categories like comedy, horror, and drama, subscribe to my channel so you'll see when those videos get posted. Please make sure to like and share these videos because it helps out not only me, but the filmmakers as well. And now, here are the documentary red carpet interviews for Cinequest 2020.
The film is about a small but mighty team of women who are fighting to free people sentenced to life in prison for drugs, life without parole. And it's also a look at the way in which a woman filmmaker tells that story.
It does seem insane that, there are people that have gone to jail for killing someone, they get out, it happens again, and yet there are guys that, smoke pot 3 times and they're in jail.
Exactly, and that's exactly what the film is designed to do, is to spark conversation about why we have illogical and irrational responses to drug offenses, but we don't have the same responses to other crimes. Yeah, and so it's a look deep into the nuances, and it asks America, do you feel safer? Does this make sense to you? And what can we do about it?
So this is the kind of stuff you deal with on a daily basis then with your job?
Absolutely. And that, for me, I've been doing it for almost 20 years, representing people sentenced to life in prison for drugs. And it is both a love letter to the power of women to tell stories and to affect change, but also it's a call to action for people who see this and to mobilize people and hopefully inspire people to leave them feeling more joyful, but inspired to do something.
With the legalization of marijuana in many states, is this making these kind of things do they not happen as often, or is it still happening?
No, I actually think the legalization of marijuana is going to bring to bear whether America is really ready for actual criminal justice change. Because we can't have people who are serving life in prison for marijuana and have people who are making life savings off of marijuana. So we're sort of at a crossroads. I think this is a critical time for America to think about what it wants to do with drug policy.
Now, this film, it's pretty much your story, right?
Yes.
What happened?
Well, I had a life sentence for a little bit of cocaine, and these ladies here, they came and got me.
And of that life sentence, how long were you in there?
I was in there 16 years of a life sentence. After 16 years, numerous of beautiful ladies just...
What's interesting about Edward's case is, going back to your question about marijuana, his first strike happened in 1989. It was a marijuana possession, right? And a lot of people don't know that you can possess marijuana back in the 1980s, like a lot of people were possessing marijuana in the 1980s. And that conviction where he got probation and his case was dismissed was the first strike. His second strike happened when he possessed a personal use amount of cocaine in the early 90s. And then his third strike was a small vial of crack cocaine. He got a mandatory life sentence. And a lot of people don't understand that's how the law works. A lot of people don't know there's no parole in the federal system. So Edward was essentially buried alive, banished for life, without any possibility of parole until we were able to earn his freedom.
Well, in drug laws, it's such a weird thing because they're attempting to protect you from yourself by doing the drugs, so they're locking you up forever, as opposed to you did something to someone else, you're dangerous.
Exactly. And so that's why, there's a lot of propaganda out there. You and I have both heard it about public safety. But I would recommend anyone to see this film and to really think about whether they felt any safer with Edward Douglas in prison for 15 years.
Now, being locked away, how did you talk to her? How did this whole thing start? How did you get out?
It's a story. It really is a story. She just, yes, actually, see the film, but a little value of it was that she got in touch with my mother, and she told my mother, could she be my lawyer? And she called me and asked me, and she told me she was my lawyer. And I'm like, I don't have no lawyer. She said, I'm your lawyer now. And it worked out. And she said she was not leave till she got me out. She got me out. Now she's in Florida working on someone else.
And that's really, I think, what is important, and what I hope people will take away from this film is the way in which we as women are the first responders to the crisis of mass incarceration, and the way in which we as women filmmakers are recording that history accurately.
So now, I'm hearing how, you guys got together, you found them. How did this turn into a movie?
That would be me. And I started following them around about 2 years ago when we started compiling some of the initial footage that My Angel had gathered for clients that she was trying to get out. She was coming up with very creative ways of getting people out of prison. And of course we took note, and I'm kind of a one-woman show myself putting this together. We talk about the isolation that we're both kind of facing. There's a lot of work she does alone, and there's a lot of work I was doing alone, gathering things, telling their stories, but then also wanting to make sure I could also shine a light on these women who are heroes, who are doing this work. Yet that then involves me doing this because I wanted them to be the subjects of it so that I can tell the world what heroic women these people are without them having to tell their own story, because we often do that. We say, figure out how you're going to fix this problem, figure out how you're going to make your story part of history so we pay attention. How do we mark all of this? And I think that is the job of a filmmaker, is to see stories like this, put it together, and figure out how you're going to get it out there.
You know, I think America is really good at erasing people. We erase them by putting them in cages and locking them up for the rest of their lives. We erase the voices of their families who want them back. And we often erase the work of women who are doing this work to get them free. And so what this film really is about is a response to that erasure, to make sure that people see what's happening and they see it through the lens of a woman filmmaker who's doing it, which is deeply important because we know that another layer of erasure is the creative contributions to getting these stories told.
This is Naughty Books. We're a documentary about self-published romance novels.
This is the one that kind of in the wake of 50 Shades of Grey, there was kind of a...
Yes, there was an explosion of self-published romance novels, and we sort of follow the ups and downs of a few of the writers who pursued it, and Lauren's actually one of the writers that we followed.
So, I mean, did you write like filthy stuff on the way here?
Oh yeah, actually I did, on the plane. It's kind of my life now.
So what was it like kind of putting the documentary together?
I mean, it took 5 years for us to do it, and we shot in 9 different states, and yeah, it was a very long journey. It's the short version of that.
What was your favorite part about making this?
I think my favorite part was definitely working with all of these people and all the people that I met, and just in terms of the creative challenge was we had several different subjects and a lot of ideas, and figuring out how to weave all of those things together into a sort of compelling and illuminating film.
Is it a misunderstood industry? Do people just look at all the books and go, 50 Shades?
Yes, for sure, and I'm sure Laurelyn can speak to that even more, but yes, absolutely. First of all, I think romance is not one thing, it's more of an umbrella. There's lots of different types of books that compose under the genre of romance, and it's not just sex. Like, they talk about a lot of different issues within that, guys.
What were you doing before you started writing?
I actually worked in a church beforehand. Isn't that crazy? But that's part of the thing that I think is interesting about the topic that Austin explored in this film, is that that romance is not, it's treated like this stigma in so many ways, and it's so female-centric. It's kind of a misogynistic stigma that is associated with it, that men don't have anything that's like it, that they're crucified for. So that was a really interesting thing to be able to explore, I think, in this film.
It's for some reason assumed that women hate sex, and it just, guys are doing it wrong, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Inaccurate assumption. Agreed.
I think what this movie found is that women have a big appetite for a lot of different stories about relationships, romance, sex, the whole gamut, and there was a whole industry of people who saw that there was an appetite that wasn't being filled and found a way to fill it in a very short period of time. And this incredible explosion happened, and we just happened to be there to catch it and document it and sort of start asking the questions about what this appetite is about and what it means.
Far East Deep South, which is about Chinese families in Mississippi, and more specifically about our producer Baldwin Chu's family and finding the roots that led them not to China but to Mississippi, and it unravels kind of the fascinating story of the Chinese immigrants during segregation that were there in the Deep South.
Yeah, that's such a weird place because, stereotypically you're looking at the East Coast or West Coast, New York, San Francisco. Not there.
No, there's actually a rich population that was there, that was significant to the community, that owned grocery stores, a lot of the Chinese that were there. And so that's why we made the film, the documentary, is because we really wanted to show people that, a lot of Asian Americans have been in this country and other parts of the country much longer than we realized, and have been really influential in kind of the fabric of our nation.
So, obviously it's about the family, it's about but what do you guys cover? What's the documentary kind of?
Yeah.
Well, it's really because of her that started the whole thing, because I never had a grandfather. So when she was born, I saw my father holding her, and we were like, well, why did I never have a grandfather to hold me? And when we traced our family roots, we found my grandfather and great-grandfather buried in Mississippi. And that's how the whole journey of this documentary came about.
And so the film takes the audience through what we discovered, because my father-in-law, Baldwin's father, Charles, never knew his father. He was only one when his father left China for the last time. And it ends up, there's a lot of twists and turns, and so we end up discovering all these family connections to Mississippi and beyond, and really how the segregated laws, the Jim Crow laws, impacted the Chinese as well. They weren't allowed to go to white schools. They were buried in separate cemeteries. And also the Chinese Exclusion Act was in effect, which limited immigration, and really was the reason why their family was separated. And so our film goes into their journey to discover all those things.
So where are you guys actually from then? Because you're not in Mississippi, right?
No, we're in LA now, but I'm actually from the Bay Area. I was born in San Francisco, so I actually used to live and work here in San Jose for a bit.
Okay, so I can see why you were shocked when you went, wait, Grandpa's in Mississippi.
Yeah, I'm a California boy, and I lived my entire life here. But yeah, Mississippi was the last place I thought we'd find my ancestors.
Yeah, and that was the crazy thing. When we went to Mississippi, people were like, oh, how did they treat you? They're thinking like these rednecks or whatever. And most people weren't surprised that we were Chinese. They were surprised that we were from California because they were used to seeing Chinese because there was a history there. But they were just shocked that Californians would go all the way to Mississippi.
This is the film about women not being diagnosed properly by doctors?
Yes, I'm the director. My name is Trisha Regan, and the film takes on the issue of medicine. Basically, we all go to the doctor thinking we're going to get the best care available, but the truth is that's only the case if you happen to be a man, because all of our medicine and all of the science and all of the way that it's taught is around the white male body. And we have known for 20, 30 years that women are entirely different from men, that every cell in your body has a male sex to it, and every cell in my body has a female sex to it. And it creates a whole different system, so that drugs and procedures and testing procedures, it's all different for women and for men, and it's especially true, or perhaps most obvious, with heart disease, which is the #1 killer of women. These two women were literally dying of heart attacks in emergency rooms and sent home and told they were just being anxious. And so is that a mental thing or is that a physical thing? And the truth is it's both. We don't understand how the mechanism of heart disease works in a woman because we've only studied it in men until very recently. And that, if that's true for heart disease, it's certainly true for all forms of cancer, for vaccinations, for any kind of medical treatment that you receive. If you are a woman, you cannot be sure you're getting the best medical care. I mean, you probably aren't. If you are a man, you can be much, much more confident of that. So I wanted to make a film that woke people up to this idea by telling very personal stories and sort of limiting the amount of actual science, because people don't want to go to the movies to learn about science. They want to go to the movies to have an experience. And I also believe that that's how you change minds, is by moving people. So I told the story of these two women and a couple of others who were misdiagnosed and the ramifications of that, and surrounded it with the science from people like Dr. Sharon Hayes here from the Mayo Clinic, who started the first women's heart clinic at Mayo Clinic, 30 years ago, 20 years ago?
1998 formed the Women's Heart Clinic, and it was because I was observing just this, is it really wasn't known that heart disease in women and men was different, but I was seeing it in my patients. I was sitting with a man, and my male patients, like the drugs that I gave them worked as expected. The tests gave me the results that I might expect, that I'd learned. You know, until the mid-'80s, women were not included in cardiac clinical trials. So they actually were excluded. There was this thought that we could just take anything we learned about men and apply it to women. And that made us have a 20-plus year catch-up plan, and we're not caught up yet in heart disease.
Was that just because they were trying to save money and they're like, why do double tests, or why?
So it was a combination of things. It was a combination of actually thinking that they were the same, and we were protecting women. You know, you wouldn't have to enroll somebody who might get pregnant if you're trying a drug. So there was a little paternalism there. But if you actually are trying to look at sex differences in any disease, you actually have to spend more money because you have to have more people enroll in those clinical trials. So that is a big factor, although the NIH now does require that you include women and minorities in clinical trials that affect women and minorities. A lot of the research is done by for-profit firms, like if they're testing their drug, and they are not required. And so this remains a problem.
But, you know, Kelsey was in the Navy, and she was passing out, like, pretty regularly, and being sent to the emergency room and being told that she was dehydrated or had an anxiety problem, when in fact she was almost dying every time she passed out.
I was, so after 10 years of being misdiagnosed, they finally came up with a diagnosis which basically said that every time I passed out, my heart was going into a rhythm that could have killed me. So coming to terms with the fact that you have heart disease, on top of the fact that you could have died multiple times, is really something that takes a lot to work through. So the anxiety they were telling me that I was having was something they were giving me in the long run. But I think the film Misdiagnosed really gave us an opportunity to share that my story is, although special, is happening to women across the U.S., you know, and probably across the world. I mean, my story is different than Catherine's, but Catherine's story is similar in the fact that doctors just kind of were like, well, you're a woman, you're stressed out, like, good luck, have a nice day, you know. So I think this gives us an opportunity to not only share with the general public that this is an issue, but also open the eyes of some medical professionals who aren't seeing the differences in how women are being treated as opposed to how men are being treated.
Absolutely. And I think it extends past the actual diagnosis and treatment. For example, mine was a heart attack that's caused by spontaneous coronary artery dissection. So it's a tear in the artery, not anything caused by high blood pressure or cholesterol plaque or anything like that. So it's still a mystery ultimately what causes it. There's a lot of data to kind of lead the direction. But then, you know, when you get through that and you go home and you are treated as someone who just needs to suck it up and pull yourself up by your bootstraps, it's really devastating. And I used to say, you know, after the fact, it was kind of like, if, you know, after having a baby and a heart attack and open heart surgery and not being able to pick up my baby for 3 months and having a toddler who I couldn't play with, you know, I would be insane if I weren't depressed and anxious. So, you know, it's really a large, you know, ball of wax that needs to be addressed in our society. The medical community hopefully will catch up, but we need films like Misdiagnosed and the work of people like Tricia and Dr. Hayes to, you know, get people to think about this issue. So, you know, people need to come to this movie, support this movie, and help us regain those 30 years we've lost in the research community.
Because the bigger, you know, what Catherine suffered from, SCAD, spontaneous coronary artery dissection, affects mostly women in their 30s and 40s. And it was thought to be a very rare disease, and it had never been studied, but it was killing women in their 30s and 40s. And after Catherine was told that's what she had, she got online and discovered all these other women who were suffering from the same thing. And she approached Dr. Hayes and said, all these women have had the same thing. Shouldn't we study it? And that was the first time it was ever studied. And when was that?
2009 we started. Yep, we met in 2009 and we
just didn't know what to call it, but we were like, would you help us?
Yeah. So it's been a paradigm shift in this particular. I learned in cardiology school that I would maybe see 1 or 2 cases in my lifetime. It only happened to people after they had babies, which was the case with Catherine, but actually that makes up less than 10%. We were missing 80% of these.
In women.
And it affects 90% women, so it disproportionately we were misdiagnosing women who had this condition. And so I think it's very humbling and should give all of us, not just me, a great deal of humility about what we don't know in medicine, and particularly about women.
It's about the first female beat poet. She's 91 years old, Holocaust survivor, and she innovated beat poetry in San Francisco. I was collaborating with a producer named Elizabeth Montgomery on a different project, and then I was invited to Ruth Weiss's performance in San Francisco at the Monroe, and I was just hanging out with friends, and I walked in and she was on stage performing, and like her music gave chills to my bones. You imagine like this 9-year-old woman walking up on stage with blue hair and crystals on her head, and she has jazz musicians surrounding her and she's conducting them, and it was quite amazing to like see her perform. And through her poetry, it's like so raw and down to the bone that you can see her story since she was a child, escaping the Nazis, to her journey to Chicago, to New Orleans and San Francisco, and also highlighting other poets that she helped in San Francisco in the 1940s. She opened up some of the earliest poetry reading locations in bars and cafes, and really was a woman behind the scenes, but also promoting other people's work, but also her own work. And it wasn't just poets. She also collaborated with performers, actors, and dancers, and really tried to incorporate all artists' community in San Francisco. And so through her poetry, she tells her story, but it's very simplified, and it's the jazz music. It was like a movie opening up in front of me, and you can interpret her poetry in any different way. And so through this film, I interpreted her poetry through animation and dance, and reflected a lot about her quirky personality within it.
So it's a documentary, but really kind of an artsy, kind of different things incorporated?
So what I wanted to do was push the boundaries of documentary, but also be able to capture her essence through the documentary filmmaking. So when you listen to her poetry, it's like right on the beat to the music. And if you've ever heard beat poetry, it's live jazz music that was never practiced before, and you're just going off the flow of other people. So when I collaborated with the dancers, they didn't practice the dances beforehand. We played the music, and I would just kind of dance around them with the camera. And like all of it kind of came to be as it was going. So the film is kind of edited almost to the beat of her poetry and her soul, and the flow of her life.
The film is called Bleeding Audio. It's a feature-length music documentary about a band called The Matches, and we use their story and career to dig a little deeper into how the digital age of music has changed for musicians.
Okay, so kind of how recording contracts aren't. I guess the money isn't coming from albums as much anymore, and
yeah, that's part of it. But I mean, the music industry, ever since the digital era, has had so many repercussions and consequences that this band suffered, among other things that are just typical to the music industry. And we showcase every milestone and every pitfall and win. So that's what our film documents.
Now, is this looking back on the past of the band, or the current position of the band, or?
Yes, it's we dig into their career, and this whole thing was started when they decided to reunite a few years ago, and it was a pretty exciting reunion, I think, for them, for us, and yeah.
How long had you guys been apart?
5, 6 years.
6 years.
6 years. Yeah.
So is it one of those deals where you get back together and everything's just like, oh, this is yesterday, or is it like, how the hell did we do that before?
Both. Definitely both. It was a surprise that it just kind of like picked up again. But also, when you're like, when you're much older or a little older or whatever, and, you feel different after you play shows and you try and tour again, and it's not the same as when you were 20.
What's it like looking back on your story and kind of reflecting on it now?
I think in a lot of ways, we thought that the changing of the music industry was a major factor in why we fell apart, and then the climax of the film happens.
So there may have been some other issues.
There may have been, yeah.
So go see the movie, huh?
That's true.
Now, being that you guys are a band and it's about the music industry and stuff, do you guys have like a soundtrack for this film, or how's that working?
Spotify, search the matches.
I guess what I can say is that there's no official soundtrack yet, but we basically scored the entire film with Matches music in one way or another.
So there's an opportunity in the future. It definitely come out in terms of that. Yeah, sorry.
They got a good deal. They got a good deal on scoring for the film. They just used our songs.
On that music.
Now, I mean, if people are going to go out and check you guys out, what would be kind of the definitive songs that you're like, hey, if you're going to hear one of our songs, it's got to be this one or this one?
Tom.
Tom, what's your favorite?
Oh, the fan.
What's the question? Sorry.
The definitive songs that somebody should check out from the Matches.
Oh, you guys have that one. What's it called again? Salty Eyes.
Is there a drum in it?
There's a song called Salty Eyes. That's all you really need to know. What else? Oh, Say 18, Chain Me Free, Dog-Eared Page.
Is that one of those songs that the band, like, it's like, oh, do we have to play that one again?
The fans know what's up. The fans know what's up.
What?
He's done.
He's done. He's done.
What was your favorite part about making the movie?
For them?
Anybody. Whoever had fun. I mean, if you guys were all miserable, that's fine.
My favorite part. My favorite part of making the movie was just, honestly, all the people that came together to help me make it. It wouldn't be here without the support of so many people, and I think too, these guys are so humble. They have no idea why I made a movie about them, and I think like when they saw it, I hope that they understand why I chose to make a movie about them, and that's been a really cool journey to see, and I can't wait for audiences to have it. That's the next exciting part.
You guys have a website if they want to check out more about the movie?
Yeah, bleeding-audio.com. Did you have something you wanted to say?
I was just going to say, I recommend it as a form of therapy, having a documentary filmed about you. It really brings some things to light.
More Cinequest interviews are going up on ADAMICradio.com and the YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe so you can see when those get posted. And please like and share the videos to help promote the work of these filmmakers. I'm Adamic. I'll see you later.